In The Poetics of Space, Bachelard writes, "Great images have both a history and a prehistory. They are always a blend of memory and legend, with the results that we never experience the image directly. Every great image has an unfathomable oniric depth to which the personal past adds special color. It is better to live in a state of impermanence than in one of finality." The Dallas John F. Kennedy visited in 1963 was a conservative, reactionary city. Kennedy, on seeing a newspaper advertisement in the Dallas Morning News that day citing him for treason, is reported to have said, "We're in nut country now."
This is Mayor Earl Cabell of Dallas, Texas, a town that's getting ready the city that's getting ready for the visit very shortly of the President of the United States. Your city encountered some rather unfortunate publicity here a month ago with the visit of Ambassador Stevenson.
Surely, my dear friend, I don't have to come here from Illinois to teach Texas manners, do I?
Outside the auditorium, one man spat on him, and a woman hit him with her placard.
We undoubtedly will have a few pickets, as you have everywhere in the United States. There will probably be a few of the radical right wing, possibly a few of the radical left wing. But sincerely, we anticipate no trouble.
Because of the unfortunate incident which occurred here during the visit of Ambassador Stevenson, people everywhere in the world will be hypercritical of our behavior.
The shockwaves from that day still radiate from Dallas, and for years the nation blamed Dallas for the murder. But the trip to Dallas started out with such promise. As Air Force One threaded the line down Lemon Avenue and landed on runway 31, a surge of excitement permeated the crowd. Rich Dallasites may have hated Kennedy, but the people loved him.
A short while ago before the sun broke through. Feels mighty good, too, believe me. Next big jet approaching.
Hey, President!
And this one should contain the President and Mrs. Kennedy.
Here comes Jack!
Here comes the big jet in. Fire marshals and all following the plane, which is normal precaution where the President goes. Right into us now. Standing in the car with a big 10-gallon hat on. Mrs. Kennedy stepping in the car first. Now the President. They both in the back seat now. Now the motorcade will very shortly start to move out. The presidential car moving out. The President and First Lady. Big, beautiful Lincoln, followed by Secret Service men, the car behind. Then comes the Vice President and Mrs. Johnson, Senator Yarborough. Dallas police out here in force today. doing a beautiful job of handling the crowd, along with a contingent of Texas Rangers. The party now is leaving Dallas Love Field, and of course, as we say, thousands will be on hand for that motorcade now, which will be downtown Dallas, down Cedar Springs, to Harwood, and on Harwood it'll turn on Main, from which point it'll go all the way down to the courthouse area, which is the end of Main. It'll turn on Houston Street to Elm under the triple underpass, out to the march where the president talks at approximately 1 o'clock.
Near noon, the motorcade heads downtown.
At 11:55 a.m., 2 motorcycle policemen swung their vehicles through a hole in the fence, and the president departed Love Field, headed east on Mockingbird Lane. The Kennedys and the Conleys nodded and smiled as they passed filling stations and the big Coca-Cola plant, and the restaurants where lunch customers poured out, wiping their mouths and waving. At the turn off Mockingbird onto Lemon Avenue, Governor Conley grabbed the metal bar in front of him, stood up, and sat back down again. Unless all early signs were wrong, about 250,000 people had turned out to see Kennedy in Dallas. As the motorcade drove down Lemon Avenue, the crowds grew heavier and heavier, street by street. The receptions in other cities in Texas had been bigger than predicted, but Dallas was incredible. Somewhere near Lemon and Mahana, the crowds began to open their throats with a continuous roar, which spread from street to street ahead of the motorcade. It drowned out the sounds of the motorcycles. At Craddock Park, the president saw a long, limp sign held by little boys and girls. It read, "Mr. President, please stop and shake our hands." The president leaned between Governor and Mrs. Conley and had the driver stop. The president leaned out and shook the children's hands before the Secret Service herded the children away. Further along Lemon at Reagan Street, the crowds bulged from the building line to a point off the curb. The president held his right hand up and out and kept grinning at the crowd. In back of the crowd, the small figure of Father Oscar Huber hopped up and down as he strained to see the president and Mrs. Kennedy. After the president had passed, he hopped up once again and saw the back of the president's head as the car retreated. A little more than 1 hour later, Father Huber would perform the last rites on President Kennedy. Just past Hood Street, the cars made a slow right turn onto Turtle Creek Boulevard. The Kennedys were in a section of North Dallas where parks and a statue of Robert E. Lee created a different world. A few people lined the right side of the street, but the crowds were thin in this part of the motorcade route. As the car drove down Turtle Creek, Mrs. Kennedy reached into her purse and put her sunglasses on. President Kennedy turned to her and said, "Take off the glasses, Jackie." A few moments later, she absent-mindedly slipped the glasses back on again, only to be reminded once again by the president to take them off. As they drove down Turtle Creek, the president asked Governor Conley about a poll that was set to come out in the Houston Chronicle the next day. Conley said the poll would show that the Democrats would win Texas in '64, but that it would be close. The president asked, "How will it show you running, Governor?" Conley replied, "I think it will show me running a little ahead of you," to which the president replied, "That doesn't surprise me," and ended the conversation. The president did not address the governor again. As the motorcade headed down Cedar Springs to Harwood towards Main Street in the center of the city, Police Chief Curry studied the crowds who were spread up the walls, hanging out the windows, and on rooftops. In a moment, they were at the head of Main Street. On the left was police headquarters. Officers stood in windows and prisoners on the top floor strained to look down. In 2 hours, Lee Harvey Oswald would be taken to this building to be questioned in the murder of President Kennedy. In 2 days, Oswald would be killed just behind these doors on his way to the county jail. Except for a lane in the center of Main Street, the entire street and sidewalk were covered with people, a solid mass of people for 12 blocks. Governor Conley thought they're stacked from the curb to the walls. People were even hanging out the open windows of buildings along Main Street. The crowds in Dallas were large and friendly. A shockwave of sound roared down Main Street to welcome the president. At Field Street, FBI agent James Hosty was standing watching the large crowd. Hosty had worked the Lee Harvey Oswald case for several months, but as the president drove down the center of the street, Hosty didn't think of Oswald. He didn't consider him a threat to anyone, just a nuisance. The president had 8 more blocks to go before he arrived at Dealey Plaza.